Hello, here we have another Philosophy of Law lecture video. The topic of this lecture is rule of law, and we're going to talk about impeachment and how that relates to the rule of law. Specifically, we're going to be talking about impeachment of the United States President. We want to start with what the law actually says about impeachment. And for that, we have to go to the Constitution of the United States. There we see laid out exactly the reasons that a public official may be impeached and how the proceedings are to take place. So first off, Article 2, Section 4 of the Constitution says the President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. In our country, in the 3 times that presidents have been impeached, it is under the crime of, quote, other high crimes and misdemeanors. We've never had occasion to impeach a president for treason or bribery. But this says exactly the reasons that a high public official may be impeached. Second, in Article 1, Section 2, it says the House of Representatives shall have the sole power of impeachment. The House brings charges against the official. They vote, and a simple majority, just more than 50%, and they have enough to impeach. And think about impeachment as meaning something similar in a criminal case to an indictment. An impeachment is like an indictment. It just means that formal charges have been brought against the official. The Senate is where the trial takes place. Article 1, Section 3, the Senate shall have the sole power to try all impeachments. That's where the trial will take place once the charges have been brought in the House. It takes what is called a supermajority to convict someone. Quote, no person shall be convicted without the concurrence of 2/3 of the members present. It's from Article 1, Section 3. So if all 100 members of the Senate show up, which when something this important is going on, let's hope they do, then you need at least 66 votes to convict. Fewer than that, there is no conviction. Now, if a public official, like the president, is found guilty of the charges brought in an impeachment, the Constitution also tells us the limits on the punishment that the person can receive. Quote, judgments in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than to removal from office and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States. So the person can be removed from office and disqualified from holding any future office in the federal government. However, Article 1, Section 3 continues, the party convicted shall nevertheless be liable and subject to indictment, trial, judgment, and punishment according to law. So if the person is found guilty and removed from office, they might still be subject to criminal proceedings for the same crimes after they have been removed from office. So they're not free from that possible legal peril. So, to summarize, the President of the United States may be impeached for treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. And that phrase, other high crimes and misdemeanors, is one that will be very significant in thinking about whether or not the presidents who were impeached deserved to be impeached. The House impeaches, the Senate tries the case, 2/3 majority, or 66 out of 100, is needed to convict. And if convicted, the punishment is limited to removal from and disqualification for office. So, only 3 times in history has a United States president been impeached. Two actually in modern history. One was Andrew Johnson in the late 1800s. So we're going to look at the two more recent impeachments. Now, the impeachment of President Clinton begins with an investigation by the independent counsel, who was assigned to look into a real estate deal that the president had been part of when he was governor of Arkansas. This led the independent counsel Kenneth Starr to look into a sexual harassment claim by a woman named Paula Jones. And in investigating the Paula Jones sexual harassment allegation, he was led to look into Monica Lewinsky. There were rumors that the president had been having an affair with a White House intern. Now, a woman named Linda Tripp, who worked in the same office as Monica, befriended her and began recording phone conversations in which Monica talked about her relations with the president. Monica was questioned and some of her possessions were taken into evidence. And there was a blue dress that had a stain on it that matched the president's DNA. So she agreed to talk to the independent counsel on the agreement that she would receive immunity from prosecution. So President Clinton was questioned, and under oath he denied that he was having sexual relations with Monica Lewinsky. So eventually he was charged with perjury, which is lying under oath, and obstruction of justice. Among other things, he had asked Monica to lie about it and had done other things to keep the independent counsel from finding out what was going on. So once he was officially impeached, it went to the Senate for the trial, where Clinton was found not guilty. In other words, he was acquitted of the charges. On the perjury charge, the vote was 55 to 45. 10 Republicans had voted with the Democrats on this. And obstruction of justice, it was a 50-50 split. But, of course, you need a 2/3 majority to convict. So he was found not guilty. So even though Clinton was impeached, he was acquitted of the charges. More recently, President Trump was impeached. And this began with a whistleblower complaint. The president was having a phone call with the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. And it seemed to the whistleblower as if at least from what he or she had heard, that the president was trying to set up a quid pro quo agreement with Zelensky, that Zelensky would begin an investigation or announce an investigation into Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden. And in exchange, Trump would release funds that had been allocated from the United States to the Ukrainian government from our government by Congress. And so once money has been allocated by Congress to go, let's say, to a foreign government, the president is not allowed to step in the way of that. And so that was the issue that the whistleblower thought was illegal. And this led to a House investigation into this phone call. And so from that, Trump was impeached on 2 charges. One is abuse of power. That would have to do with the alleged stopping of the funds until Zelensky began or announced this investigation. And 2, that the president tried to keep Congress from hearing from certain people and seeing certain documents related to the phone call. As with President Clinton, President Trump was found not guilty of the charges during his trial in the Senate. On abuse of power, the vote was 52 to 48. And obstruction of Congress, the vote was 53 to 47. And the votes fell along what we typically call party lines, with most of the Republicans voting to acquit, and all of the Democrats and a few independents voting to find him guilty. So now let's look at how impeachment relates to the rule of law. Now, if you recall, we have our 5 principles of the rule of law. These outline what it means to be a society and a government under the rule of law. And there are 5 of them. Number 3, of course, has several parts. Not all of these are relevant necessarily, although they might be, and there may be some way to interpret all of them in some way to see as being related to the issue of impeachment. But there are some that are more important when talking about impeachment, and I'm going to highlight each of these. First is the idea of government under law, the idea that no one is above the law. Even the highest public official in the land, the President of the United States, can be held accountable. Second, we have a government by rules. As we saw in the Constitution, we lay out what crimes one may be impeached for and how the impeachment process is to take place and what it takes to convict and what the punishment will be. So the rules are laid out. There's issues of fair warning that come up, though, that are more controversial. There's the question of whether the phrase other high crimes and misdemeanors is clear and specific enough in what it prohibits. And in the arguments about both the Clinton and the Trump impeachment, each side was trying to argue that what the president had done, it was something that was a high crime and misdemeanor. And one side said it was, and the other side said it wasn't. Is it the case that lying about an extramarital affair is a high crime and misdemeanor? Or is it the case that trying to engage in political dealings with a foreign official is a high crime and misdemeanor? And on E, under fair warning, there's the question of whether the laws are applied impartially. Impeachments are political trials. The president is a political office. And so there's a question about whether any impeachment could actually be impartial. We saw how the votes went down in the Senate, which they were mostly, although not in the case of Clinton, it was slightly different, but the case that it was right along party lines for the most part. And 4, there's a question of due process. In each of these cases, did the president, the person who was impeached, did they receive a fair trial? Did the people who were investigating follow proper procedure? So, as usual, we have a few assignments this week. Just briefly, there's discussion. Remember, you have to make your initial post of at least 100 words, and then you must respond at least 3 times to others. The question has to do with whether or not you believe that the charges against Clinton meet the constitutional standard of high crimes and misdemeanors. In other words, should Clinton have been impeached? You may do some research on this on your own. It may just occur to you in your mind whether or not Clinton committed high crimes and misdemeanors. So you have 2 talking points to do this week. First, ask you to explain in your own words how impeachment of the president demonstrates rule of law in action. And the second one, ask you to explain why this phrase, other high crimes and misdemeanors, runs up against Principle 3B about reasonably clear in meaning and specific. So, that concludes this week's video lecture in philosophy of law. Cheers.